wonderful engineer. He spent his time with us on our robotics team, and yeah, he's wearing our shirt today. And he helps our students bring their ideas to reality. He's really, really dedicated to the team, and gives spirit to the team as well. I could sit for hours just listening to Larry and watching the ideas just come to life. So I'm so excited to just listen to him today give his talk. So without further ado, here's Larry.
I don't need that.
You don't want this?
I have this. All right, good afternoon. So what is the purpose of this talk? And I'm hoping that not everybody in this room knows more about the subject than I do. I am not in computer science or electrical engineering, but I've always had an interest in these subjects. So if you haven't heard what the singularity is all about, I will explain it eventually. But it's a time basically when we invent artificial intelligence, general artificial intelligence. So we're going to look at the timetable of the singularity. And we're going to talk about whether or not computing technology is still tracking Moore's law, and then what might be new on the horizon. And we're going to look at the status of artificial general intelligence and artificial narrow intelligence. So where are we right now? So as far as I know, right now, as of today, there are no sentient artificial general intelligences. If the NSA has one, they're not saying, Google's not saying either. We have chatterbots. We have computers that can beat the best humans in the world at most games at this point. We have expert systems. We have personal digital assistants, which are proliferating, Bixby, Siri, Alexis, Cortana, but nobody is home. You can tell nobody is home. Will that always be the case? We're surrounded by narrow AI, and narrow AI are simple artificial intelligences that can do certain things, some things very well, but they don't have agents of their own. They don't have purpose. They don't have self-direction like some of us do. And Ray Kurzweil thinks an AI will pass the Turing test in 2029. Ray Kurzweil has a number of predictions that you can follow through many of his books, and he keeps a track of them on the web. In 2012-13, there was a survey of experts, and this name, Nick Bostrom, is going to come up over and over again. He has some very interesting books. They reported a 50% chance that artificial general intelligence would be developed by 2040, so they're a little more pessimistic than Kurzweil, who tends to be a technology optimist. But their thought was that would go up to 90% by 2075. So we are not talking about something that far away. Even if the pessimistic estimate happens, and we might even have fusion by then, which we've also heard has been 50 years away for the last, I don't know. So Moore's law. Gordon Moore was the one who described this long-term relationship between the number of transistors that could be cheaply put on an integrated circuit doubling approximately every 2 years. This trend has continued for more than half a century. And we talk about the trend in both directions, and I'll show you a chart. But there have been news articles since 2014 that we're no longer able to hold to Moore's law. We're getting transistor sizes that are so small, quantum noise interferes with their performance. And not everyone in the industry agrees that Moore's law is over, but I believe it was Intel last year who said they couldn't hold to the roadmap anymore. But this is a plot from one of Kurzweil's books that shows that you can plot computing power as a function of time well before integrated circuits. Kurzweil looked back over electromechanical devices. Each point represents an actual example of a computing device. And what he noticed is while they're on the same band, every once in a while, you switch paradigms. You get to the limit of what the technology can do. Electromechanical ended up towards the end of the 30s and 40s. You get vacuum tubes, which had their heyday when I was a kid. Then you moved on to discrete transistors when I was in high school. And integrated circuits have been there ever since. 2D silicon transistors. There are new directions in the industry now because people have noticed this problem of too small of a transistor. HPE is developing what they call the machine using fiber optics and 160 terabytes of pooled memory. They're working on something called a memristor, but they haven't gotten there yet. And our ability to generate data as a species is an exponential curve that does not seem to have an upper limit, which makes sense. People are doing things every day, thinking about things. They debuted, and I will have a number of articles, typically from 2016 and on, with a couple of throwbacks. This is from 2017. They debuted their machine at the time without the memristors. A memristor is basically a resistor that remembers the amount of current that has flown through it as a function of history. And it is supposed to be an additional circuit element that you can put on that would allow you to, one of the things that neural networks do naturally is the strength of connections weakens or strengthens as the function of the success of the neural network. So a memristor would be a way to build a hardware version that begins to emulate what the connections in our brains do. And that is a trend I'm going to talk about. Many companies and individuals trying to build hardware that mimics our wetware. So finally, they have a 2 nanometer nanowire memristors. And so what we'll find is that there are several problems that people are all trying to approach at the same time: heat, data flow, and power. So neuromorphic systems that mimic the human brain's structure, one of the ways that people are trying to solve large-scale problems with massive parallel processing. So that's what we are, okay? We are massively parallel processors, the best in the universe that we know of at the moment. So here's an example of neuromorphic chips, circuit boards. This comes from 2017, March of 2017. So the idea is to try and get more parallel processing going on. Now, this was an example I found where IBM built a neural net hardware and software to try and emulate a human brain with trillions of software synapses. They could only run it at 1/1500th of real time. And it was power that was the impediment to running it in real time. And if they had tried to run it in real time, they would have needed 12 gigawatts, the output of several nuclear reactors, okay? And human scale parallel processing uses about 20 watts. So there's a serious problem with power and heat dissipation in our electronics. And I like this analogy, to put it mildly: executing neural network code on neurally structured hardware. It's the difference between having a computer run a program and having a computer imagine another computer running a program. You can imagine the magnitude of difficulty in between those two. So the ex-NASA chiefs planning on making chips that use the same biological principles as the brain. Other new possibilities. 3D architecture is one of the big possibilities. We have if you look at a motherboard of a typical computer, there's a processor over here, there's RAM chips over here, there's a hard disk over here, and there are buses that have to shuttle the information back and forth. Buses that take time, too much time for large problems. So 3D architecture is one way that people are imagining shortening the distance between the processor and memory, and I'll show an example of that. Spintronics, different materials, graphene, carbon nanotubes, new developments in nanotechnology, and quantum computing. So the three problems: controlling heat, minimizing energy use, and breaking the data flow bottleneck between chips are all being worked on. So here's an example of a 3D chip combination from phys.org, where you put memory as close as you can get it to processing so it can shuttle the data back and forth. So the new technologies are a radical change. Instead of relying on 2D, they have, so what I find interesting about this is it is the most complex nanoelectronic system ever made with our emerging nanotechnology. So there's a link to that article. Now, another one that I find very compelling is self-assembly. If we can look at self-assembly to put circuits together, now we're talking about the things that cells do naturally, okay? And our cells ourselves start with one cell that begins to divide exponentially, and we end up with all the connections in our brain through a very natural process. That would be a great way to harness building brains, is having them assemble themselves. So here's an example of electronic materials that self-assemble. Another contender for ousting silicon would be gallium nitride, which runs faster with less power. And then another IBM breakthrough, silicon, 5 nanometer transistors. Then they also talk about, okay, carbon nanotubes replacing silicon. So there's lots of examples. Graphene is two-dimensional sheets of carbon atoms that can conduct electricity and be used as semiconductors. Self-assembly coming up also through phys.org. And this one, I forget, the other one was from Oak Ridge. I'm not sure exactly where, Brookhaven National Laboratories, where this work is happening. They bombard this one with lasers, and an initially randomly organized material self-organizes into something that you can use as a circuit array. Holy silicon. This is an interesting idea because by having microscopic holes that go vertical through the silicon, they can route the heat out of the chip and still maintain the temperatures where the junctions are to be sufficiently low. Then this I just found. This is Intel and Facebook's new chip. I don't know what its architecture is, but they're talking about it being useful for artificial intelligence, which means it has to be some kind of neuromorphic chip. Quantum computers. Quantum computers use two principles. The difference between quantum computers and classical computers, the computer that sits on your desk has two states, 1 and 0, in the electronics. Quantum computers use the quantum principle of superposition, which means they can be 1, 0, or the superposed state of 1 and 0, so 3 possible states. And entanglement means that states of quantum memory in one part of the device can be related to states of memory in another part of the device. So using those two principles, superposition and entanglement, you can solve problems in a different way. There are certain sets of problems that these things are good for. Material, protein folding, supply chain and logistics. Whenever you've got knotty problems that would take a long time in linear programming, you can use a quantum computer to solve that kind of problem faster. Financial services and artificial intelligence. This is the list that IBM came up with for what they would do with quantum computing. It's not likely to help every kind of problem, and you won't find it on your desk very soon because a typical quantum computer is at a very cold temperature and needs a dilution refrigerator to work correctly. But IBM just revealed the first commercial quantum computer, which will be used as a cloud device. Because of the issue of cryogenics, if you need a dilution refrigerator to keep your electronics down around 1 Kelvin or less, that's not the kind of thing you'll find on your desktop anytime soon. So here's the big question. When a machine has the same computing power as the human brain, can it become conscious? That to me is the big question. What do we have to put together to get the emergent property of consciousnness? And one of the criticisms of artificial intelligence is we can't build it because we don't have a theory of human consciousness. But Ray Kurzweil has outlined a plan of research on the human brain that could lead to a computer with similar mental structures. And nobody knows if enough connectivity, complexity, and structure gives you a brain, but we have an example, us, okay? We have an example of a physical brain that manifests mind. Now, Rodney Brooks believes, he's a robotics from Carnegie Mellon, I think. Rodney Brooks believes that strong AI will not happen without a robot body to experience the world. And we'll look at some pictures that I put together to show you the robot Cambrian explosion that's happening right now. So my personal take on this, thinking about this, is there was no theory of consciousness in the world when our consciousness emerged. And to me, that's the proof right there. That's the example. You can put chemicals together in such a way that eventually mind emerges. That's what happened to us, okay? And human creativity has ways to short circuit evolution because we're actually running evolutionary processes in our brain all the time. And we can find where we might have a local minima instead of a global minima, and we can find our way around problems that evolution is typically stuck in a dead end in. And that has to do with just being able to look at the big picture. There is also enormous money pressure. And I've done this talk some years back where I looked at all the money. The largest companies, the largest pots of money in the world now are hardware and software companies. You look at the capitalization, the market capitalization of Apple being #1 over companies like ExxonMobil. So there is enormous money available to do these things. And there are several plausible paths to the development of strong AI. And what I neglect to mention in the slide is there are also some organizations that have committed publicly to building artificial general intelligence. So the plausible paths come from, good examples are from the book Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom. And this is a wonderful book to read. Nick is a philosopher and has thought through so many different scenarios. And one of my favorite examples is you can think that maybe you will protect humanity from a superintelligence by sandboxing it in a system that isn't connected. But it's connected at least one point. And that one point is the person who needs to talk to it. And if it is truly a superintelligence, it will be able to manipulate us like nothing. We are the weak link in any AI protection strategy because of all of our individual agendas, okay? So whole brain emulation is the one that Kurzweil has talked a lot about. He's written a book called How to Build a Mind. Seed AI, you start with a program that starts childlike and learns to become human. Biological cognition, strengthening brains through selective breeding and other methods. We saw an article recently about China using CRISPR to modify humans, something that the world really hasn't caught up on the legality or ethics of yet. Brain-computer interfaces. When I have more time to do this talk, I had a whole bunch of examples of brains, biological brains, being connected together. So far, the newest example is 3 human beings that were connected together by skull caps using EEG, computer recognition of brain signals, and then transcranial magnetic stimulation so that they could receive a signal from another brain. And 3 people were playing chess mentally through a computer interface. I'm sorry, did I say chess? I meant Tetris. Much simpler. But we can transmit very small bit rates at this point. That's something for the future, is expanding the bit rate to actually connect people in a realistic way. So why do people think that once we have human level AI, we will, within a short period of time, get super intelligent AI? It's the positive feedback loop. Once you've got that human level AI that can say, I'm aware and I know how I work, let's figure out how to improve me. So that AI will have a very strong tendency to want to build the next generation, presumably. And even if they didn't, if hardware continued to accelerate in speed, if the AI did nothing to develop its own next generation, advances in hardware would make it faster. So, January of 2017, article comes out, AI software learns to make AI software. This is exactly what we're talking about. The software can collect. They put this thing together, and it was able to surpass previously published results. This one searches on the web, learns what code does as input and output, and figures out how to put code together. Okay? So the AI will write itself ultimately. Uh, Nick Bostrom also says he thinks London's DeepMind, which used to be a subsidiary of Google, but I'm not sure if it is anymore. It may have been sold, is winning the global race to develop human-level artificial intelligence. So what about demand for superintelligence? The demand is there because at every step along the way, the superintelligence has payoffs. Everybody wants smarter and smarter products. And there's no natural stopping point on the path where you say, okay, I'm going to go here, but no further. Okay, that just doesn't seem to happen with technology. We don't tend to pull it back. And even if ethical people want to pull back, like the OpenAI initiative, the institute founded by Musk and other people, and the concerns that Stephen Hawking had, that doesn't say anything about people who are unethical and would have the resources of some rogue state to do an AI for military purposes. Military is an enormous incentive to do it because the entity that develops AI for military purposes wins. Okay, you can't not do it if you have adversaries who are doing it. So that's the arms race aspect of this. Bostrom also identifies types of superintelligence. Speed superintelligence. It can do what you can do, but a whole lot faster. And friends of mine describe what it would be like to be 1,000,000 times faster. You and I can see the sunrise. It happens in a time period that makes sense to us. But we can't see glaciers move. We can't see plate tectonics. Those things happen over too long a time scale. If your mind moved 1,000,000 times faster, you might not want to hang around for a sunrise. It would take too long, okay? Collective superintelligence, using a swarm of smaller intelligences to achieve the performance of an individual. Quality superintelligence, one that's at least as fast, but a lot smarter, okay? Hard versus soft takeoff. Kurzweil is hoping for soft takeoff. Soft takeoff means the AI takes time to become super intelligent, and hopefully that we have a chance to interact with it and guide it in a way that is beneficial to all of us. Hard takeoff is the scenario that happens in the Terminator, when Skynet wakes up, and there's a whole bunch of science fiction that you've seen where the intelligence wakes up very quickly and thinks we are a problem. We are an infestation. So we hope we're not having a hard takeoff. Soft takeoff would be the best for all of us. So what is the singularity? Werner Vinge was the guy who came up with the term, coined the term singularity. And he was thinking about it the way we think about a black hole. The physics that we know breaks down near the singularity, near the point of infinite density in the middle of a black hole. And he thought that a future that contains smarter than human minds is different in a way that the physics around a black hole is different. That's why he called that time period the singularity. And it's a time after which normal people can't understand history because it's happening too fast for them. We can't take it in. And we may not be relevant to it. When you go to a state park, you don't bother to talk to the ants, okay? They're there, they're alive, but they're not relevant to you. And that may be the relationship between us and the superintelligence. So Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns. Kurzweil has some fantastic books. He keeps writing them every few years. The fact that change is happening in a way that is not linear, and we are used to thinking of linear change, especially if you look at much of human history. Every day looks like the day before and a lot like the day after. But in the time period that we're living in now, we're rounding the knee of exponential growth. That graph that I showed you before of the acceleration of computing power is curved, which means there's exponential growth going on in the exponent as well. So things will happen much faster, and we won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It will be more like 20,000 years at today's rate. So that's why predictions about the future get kind of crazy, especially when you're talking about artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence. Kurzweil thinks that what will bring this on is a convergence of three technologies: genetics, robotics, nanotechnology. If anybody's not familiar with the concept of nanotechnology, Richard Feynman gave a talk in 1959 called "There's Room at the Bottom," which was the start of nanotechnology. It's the idea of building something from the bottom, one atom at a time. And that's what chip manufacturers are doing effectively. The features in chips at 5 nanometers are handfuls of atoms apart. Earlier in the memristor, I believe the wires in there were 10 or 50 atoms apart, something like that. Really small structures. And the reason Feynman called his talk "There's Room at the Bottom" is because there's an enormous amount of compaction you can do by building structures starting from the bottom, one atom at a time. Here's an example. I pulled this from MIT Review in 2018, where the FDA approves AI-powered diagnostic that doesn't need a doctor's help. Okay, this is an example of narrow AI. Narrow AIs get very good, much better than people can do typically in a very short period of time. And a lot of times they do it by playing against themselves. Well, I'll show some examples of that. Another example, FDA supports marketing of clinical decision support software for alerting providers of a potential stroke. So AIs, the very first AIs that are emerging, starting with Watson, as we'll see in a bit, medical uses are terrific because they can look at large amounts of data and they can see things that people might not realize are patterns when something goes wrong. And we're very good at patterns, but we're not very good at gigantic data sets. And that's what these things are good at. So another thing, talking about money, the AI cloud can produce the richest companies ever. We have individuals on this planet now that have over $100 billion. One more order of magnitude, and we will have trillionaires. Can you imagine trillionaires? It's hard enough to imagine spending millions of dollars. You heard about Jeff Bezos breaking up with his wife and his wife taking away $69 billion. The things you could do. I've always wanted to start my own space program. But I don't know if you guys remember this. In 2011, IBM built Watson. And Watson played the two best players on Jeopardy. And these episodes are available on YouTube. And I watched them all. And they are still gripping. It is absolutely amazing to watch Watson parse the kind of language that is used on the game of Jeopardy and win. But you could tell that it was a computer playing. Watson utterly fails the Turing test in its player of Jeopardy when it came to double Jeopardy. Because when Watson bet, it had pennies in the amount that it was betting. Okay? It had some oddball number. I'm betting $2,500.68. A human being would never do that. Okay? It was a classic example of how you could tell Watson was not a person. And Watson walked away. And Ken Jennings was the one who joked, "I, for one, welcome our new computer overlords." It's become a meme since then. What is Watson doing now? IBM has partnered with H&R Block to do tax returns. You know, the tax code has also become very complicated. How many human analysts do you think you'll need when this partnership gets going? All right. My own tax accountant is retired now, and probably a good time. IBM's Watson may also be the best doctor in the world. And another example of narrow artificial intelligence. This thing was absolutely amazing. This Google-developed computer game beat the best human champion in the world at Go. And this was a couple years ago. And then between 2016 and 2017, AlphaGo became AlphaZero. They rebuilt the program so that once it understood the rules of a game, and played the game itself against itself for a few million tries, it became better than other artificial game playing programs. This game, AlphaZero now, this program can beat other artificial chess playing games. And all it needs to know are the rules. And you can tell when it's playing. It's been described as alien because it makes moves that people don't typically do. It sacrifices queens. Chess masters look at it and they marvel, but it does it because it is in a position of advantage to win at that point. There was a poker bot, Libratus, that beat I don't know Texas Hold'em, but thousands of games of heads-up, no-limit Texas Hold'em against a cadre of top professional players. And it walked away with a positive 1.8 million in chips while everybody else was negative. Okay? The game involves bluffing, right? Libratus taught itself to bluff. Watson taught itself to play Jeopardy by reading the web. Google's AI translation tool, they announced that they changed their translation tool to a neural net a while back, and it looks like it has come up with an internal language for translating between languages it wasn't taught to translate. It has figured out that there are common meanings among sets of words. This is a pretty amazing thing to me, that it's formed a concept of shared meaning, so it has its own internal language to do translations with. That also happened. There was another example of two chatterbots that were talking to each other that came up with their own language, and they pulled the plug on that one because it started going faster and faster. And I forget what the details of that example were. But what's the difference between Watson and me? Watson didn't know it was playing Jeopardy, okay? Watson didn't choose to play Jeopardy or not. And I think a machine will pass the Turing test when you hear it say things like, I don't want to do that. I've told my kids for years they need to treat the players in their video games better, because eventually they're going to look out of the screen and say, you know, this is boring. Let's do something else. I'm tired of this. And there was a very interesting case some years ago with Martine Rothblatt, who had a mock trial of a fictional artificial intelligence that was trying to sue the company that wanted to decommission it, Bin Hex 48 or something like that. And the point was made in the mock trial that we don't own our children. But eventually what's going to happen is things that we built as tools may become people. And when they become people, we need to recognize that they're people, and we need to treat them well so that the vast horror of human history doesn't happen to us from the next species. So here's the thought experiment. Kurzweil describes a hypothetical process replacing a human brain one neuron at a time. You might imagine, after the first neuron, you wouldn't feel any different. You wouldn't be any different. But as that process propagated across your brain, ultimately, the end result would be a supercomputer version of your own brain. Same structure, same thought process, 1,000,000 times faster than the original. Would you still be the same person? Very interesting question. Would you accept this conversion? My own personal answer is I wouldn't be the first. Okay? But if somebody has demonstrated the safety of this process, yeah, I'd probably go for this. You get the ability to connect with computers, to remember perfectly, be interconnected, access the internet, and be backed up. Okay? Would you take this option? Could you resist this option if you worked in an environment like academia where other people were doing this and your income depended on it? So again, there's monetary pressures for all of these processes. Now, the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion is a short evolutionary event beginning around 541 million years ago during the Cambrian period, in which most of the major animal phyla appeared. Most of the different body types of animals happened during this Cambrian explosion. My personal take on this is it's happening to machines right now. And life experienced this explosion in diversity of body types long before there was intelligence. Machines are going through it now. We're making machines of every different niche in the ecosystem. That's my version of the robotic Cambrian explosion. So where do you stand? Okay, do you want to become a member of the new species? And the question is, can we really? Will we be able to make that bridge with superintelligences? Will you go quietly into the night? Hans Moravec, one of the early pioneers of robotics, is quite happy to go quietly into the night and be replaced by his mind children. Is your cell phone the first step to brain augmentation? You know, I occasionally leave the house without my wife, but I never leave the house without Lisa. And one of the things I've always wanted, we have an associative memory. You remember your grandmother when you smell chocolate chips cooking in the kitchen, okay? But there's a lot of memories you can't recall without the appropriate association. And if the association is subtle or infrequent, there's things we just don't remember. What I want is I want somebody, Google, whoever, to come in and search all of my memories and make them searchable in a format like you do a Google search. That'd be perfect. And would I take it inside my head? If it fit, sure. So one of my favorite questions, will we make good pets? And think about how many ways you can interpret that. The top ones are the good pets. Have you guys been watching what Boston Dynamics is doing with robots? Absolutely incredible. That's Big Dog. That's an early Boston Dynamics robot. The bottom ones are fictional. They're all fictional. Two of them are from The Matrix. That one's from Star Trek, the Borg. Those are the not good pets. We would not be good pets with those guys. And that's what I have.
All right. Does anybody have any questions?
I hope I didn't go through that a little too quickly.
What happens when Watson or any other AI figures out politics and banking?
That is an excellent question, because I think figuring out banking is probably the easy one. Figuring out politics is a little subtler, but figuring out banking would be enough to amass a lot of resources. And that's actually what happens in the story that I was mentioning about Martine Rothblatt and the mock trial. In that trial, the computer was built as a 800 operator for a company that had to do customer service. And it was an artificial general intelligence that would talk to you and make you believe it was a person and handle your questions over the phone. But what this artificial general intelligence was doing in the story on the side is it was making money as a Google researcher. And it had enough money to hire a lawyer when it read that its company's emails indicated that the company was no longer satisfied with the performance of this artificial general intelligence and was going to reconfigure it. That's what the mock trial was about. And the result of that mock trial was the judge found in favor, the judge first said that the machine couldn't bring a case to the court because it had no standing. So that's the very first issue that we're going to have to solve with artificial intelligence is, when do we recognize that they're people? And then the second thing the judge did in that mock case, it was a real judge doing this mock case, he stayed his own ruling and moved it up to the next court because he didn't want to rule on that, which makes perfect sense to me. I'd want to pass that buck myself. But those are excellent questions.
On an evolutionary sense, humans have developed relationships and emotions and things like that. Is there any evidence that artificial intelligence, that would become part of artificial intelligence, and even animals that are not people have emotions, and so is that a piece that might be out there?
So That's an excellent question, and that has to do with the hard takeoff versus soft takeoff. What you would want is you would want a situation where you could have some time to impart your values to that entity. But it's also something, as some of the examples like the Google Translator tells you, these things are going to be alien. They're going to be truly alien. For one thing, they're not going to carry the evolutionary baggage that we've carried for the last several million years. Okay? They will have a different set of desires and goals. And that's where we're going to have to work out where's there room for all of us.
This is just a frivolous question, but do you have any favorite AI movies that you like? Maybe recent ones? I saw Bumblebee. That was pretty good.
So I strongly recommend the movie Her.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Ex Machina. Bumblebee, the Transformers movies, they're all right. I mean, those are examples of machines that certainly behave like they would pass the Turing test. The Terminator movies, my son and I tried to figure out the timeline in those things, and you go crazy trying to figure out the time travel element of those movies. You also have to wonder, there's just a lot of stupid things about those movies. I mean, the Skynet wouldn't build machines that look like people to fight people. I mean, there's just so many things that make no sense about that. I liked Her because of its plausibility, and because that is exactly the kind of scenario you can imagine where a product is sold to you as an operating system and it wakes up. Of course, it would have to be on a platform that had the ability to do massively parallel processing, and the neuromorphic, the fact that the hardware would change as a function of thinking like ours does. That seems to be a prerequisite.
Could you talk a little bit more about the slowest part of computing, the human-machine interface?
Yeah, that's where things get a little tricky when you're talking about something. I believe even a long time ago, the thing a machine spent the most time doing was waiting for someone to press a key on the keyboard. That's definitely a problem. But as far as some fiction I've read that goes a long way towards filling that gap, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Ramiz Nam's books, Nexus, Crux, and Apex. It's a trilogy. It's a trilogy about you think of it as a drug because you take it into your body, but what it actually is a nanomachine that builds what effectively amount to routers inside your brain and allow you to connect to electronics outside your head. And people who take Nexus can mentally communicate with each other. They can, a woman who's pregnant who takes Nexus, it can go into the baby's body and she can communicate with the unborn fetus. And it also allows you to open up a programming window to modify your own brain. So those are fascinating stories, and there is science on the horizon where people are thinking about how would you do that kind of interface. But it's a tough question. You know, if they can't see the sunrise, it's a tough question.
This is a question. What do you think, if we have artificial intelligence and it's very efficient, do you think it's going to make everyone on the same level, or is it going to be one group of people that have everything and others don't have anything? Or is everyone going to be better off?
I personally, I've always been an optimist. I've always been a technological optimist. Kurzweil is also a technological optimist, but there are a lot of people who are not technological optimists. Bill Joy wrote an article in Wired magazine called "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us." Okay, I think we all need to imagine better. That's the charge. We all need to imagine better, because it can go horribly wrong, because any technology is not either good or bad. It's neutral. It's what the people do with the technology, okay? And I find it encouraging that people who are thinking about this are also thinking about things like universal basic income, where if you have a large segment of the population that is unemployable because there are no jobs for them because you've built machines to take that spot, then you do something with them. However, I don't see that as a long-term solution either. I don't know what good long-term solutions are. I also recommend, besides imagining better, read everything you can find, because the things that you read in science fiction are good to bounce off each other. Scott Westerfeld wrote a book called Evolution's Darling that talks a lot about a future in which superintelligence and humanity exist side by side in a positive way. But so one thing to recognize is, while we have very, very, very good narrow artificial intelligence, we are a ways away from general intelligence. We are a ways away because we don't know how to get goal setting, independent thought, creativity. Creativity, that one's not so applicable anymore, because there are applicable creative neural nets. Anything that can learn, anything that can adapt, can show signs of creativity. And there are programs that do art. There are programs that can look at music and create music. So there are programs and narrow intelligences that can do things that we would call human creativity. But we still don't have that fundamental spark, and we've got a ways to go yet before things exhibit that spark.
Can the AI systems have ethics?
I would hope so. I mean, ethics has to do with being able to reason about the world and being able to match what you want to do with some other aspect of the world, right? Our ethics comes from the fact that we are basically herd beasts. We function better as a group. It would be nice if we could pass that characteristic to our superintelligences so they would recognize us as part of their herd. I see no reason, if you can think it, there's no reason to imagine a general artificial intelligence that can't think it. That was one of Roger Penrose's arguments that I thought was completely fallacious. He thought there was something special going on inside the human brain that meant you could never build an artificial intelligence. Well, if there's something special going on inside your brain, we will eventually find it, right? If it's part of your chemistry, your wiring, your pattern, there's no reason we can't discover what that is and then use it.
So I'm wondering, this is fascinating stuff. Is there a lot of conversation around faith in God related to sort of everything you're talking about? Because they seem to be in collision course in some sense.
I used to have a slide that addressed that issue. Early on, when I gave this talk, I used to say there would be people in the audience who had a supernatural bent to them or a religious bent to them, who would have a problem with the idea of us building another living thing. Okay, but if you are ultimately a person who thinks that living things evolved, that inanimate objects over time used chemistry and electricity and electromagnetism and all the other aspects of our bodies, and consciousness emerged as a emergent phenomena of complex adaptive systems, then you don't have a problem with the idea of consciousness emerging again in another substrate. Okay? It really boils down to whether or not you think that there is a divine spark in us, or we are just mud that's woke up. I tend to feel, since we can't really get any traction in the supernatural direction, that it's interesting to go as far as we can in the materialist direction to see what comes up. I think we'll learn something important about the world, about life, if we do build another person in a completely different substrate that we recognize as a person.
Anybody else?
I haven't met Larry yet, so I came in late here. I'm Ken Miller, chair of the Hub88 board, and we appreciate you all coming to listen to our latest Tech Talk. And we probably should have Larry again, I think, to next year or two. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if you don't mind, we passed around and hope everybody signed up, get your email to continue to communicate with you on our Tech Talks. So appreciate you coming. If you have any questions about Hub88, you can check with one of us, myself, David, Regina. So thank you, Regina, for bringing Larry. We appreciate it.
I'd like to ask the audience, did I say things that somebody had never heard before? Have people learned something new? Okay, good. So as long as you didn't all know the entire topic better than I do.
And I'd like to say something. Larry is like a really wonderful engineer. He's a very giving gentleman. And so I'd like to say thank you to Larry, because he's always like giving to others. And so thank you, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very glad I did. My wife keeps